Hello, art historians, and welcome to our lecture over prehistoric art. And in this lecture, we're going to focus on Paleolithic art, which means art before we started farming. So by this point, you should already have completed, number one, your pack sheet, making predictions. And before you did that, you should have also completed the Creating the Context lecture, where we look at what was going on in the prehistoric period. So you would do the video, then do the predictions about the works of art based on what you know about the context. So now you get to go back and look at the piece presentations that your peers put together in Flipgrid on the pieces, and also this lecture, which can help you work on affirmations, which is what did you get right about your predictions, and then also correcting or contradicting what you got wrong. So the more you interact with the works of art, the more you're going to remember them. So it is very important for you guys to remember this, that of all the millions and millions of works of art in the world, the AP curriculum focused on choosing 250 works of art. They were chosen for a reason. I really want you to keep in mind this fact every time you look at a work of art, because you need to ask yourself, why did you choose this? Why are you wanting me to learn this work of art? What are you wanting me to see here? What is it proving? So for every work of art, really keep in mind that there is something in particular they are wanting you to see about it. And that will make studying for these tests a lot easier. So since we're going to be looking at prehistoric art, so remember, prehistoric art is art before there was writing, and a large amount of this artwork, we do not know 100% what it was for. So we have to kind of go based on what we can infer by looking at the pictures. So what we do know, just kind of a reminder, is during this time that's Paleolithic, or the Old Stone Age, we have hunter-gatherer societies. So what that means is these people are nomadic, they're living in small groups, they're on the move all the time, and basically their entire existence is about survival, which means that's what their art is going to be about too, because they are at the mercy of these animals and finding food that they need to survive. And yes, fruits and berries are great, but to really thrive, you need protein. So those animals were a huge part of this. So in terms of the function of these works of art, because we don't have writing, we don't 100% know what it's about. But by what we know about the context at the time, that these were nomadic hunter-gatherers, that can really help us kind of infer what they were for. So for example, we know in Paleolithic times, there's no large-scale architecture really, with some exceptions, which we have just only recently found. And we also know that their statues are going to be very small and portable so that they can take them with them as they move around. So let's think about the Apollo 11 stones. So why would the people who wrote the 250 works of art have chosen, of all works, the Apollo 11 stones? Well, there's a couple reasons why. Number one, we know that this work of art was located in Africa, and it is the oldest work of art that we have ever found, which means that if the oldest work of art ever found was in Africa, that supports the theory that human beings started in Africa, and right from the beginning of their human existence started making art. We also know that it shows that they're going to make art based out of what is readily available. They're not going to be complex. It's going to be, we have stones available, we're going to use it. We have charcoal available, we're going to use it. There's not going to be things like pottery yet, which is created. They're going to make art out of what is naturally available to them. So for example, we see in very, very early art the use of the oldest paint, and that is red ochre. And red ochre, which you guys can see here, is not synthetic, it is not man-made, it is made by nature. It is a very natural red that would represent as close as they could get to skin color that would still show on like brown rock. So we see them using very natural materials based on the environment around them. And as people move, that's going to change what they use, because not everybody is going to have ochre available. Some places are going to use animal bone as a way to create art because that is what's more available. But the big important thing is very natural materials to create art very, very early on. So over time, what's going to happen during the Ice Age, which I talked about in the context lecture, is that as the ice glaciers and everything rise up, we're going to see the water levels go down, and that allows people to move in search of food. And they travel all over the continents. They travel all over the world across land bridges. And as they do that, their art forms are going to reflect that. And where they land or where they stop is going to depend on what their art is made of. So for example, in Asia, we'll see more jade. In Africa and Europe, we'll see more natural cave paintings. In the Americas, we see more animal bone. So it just really depends. So again, what are these migrations going to mean? And if you've ever seen Ice Age, you know that that's what humans do. They migrate as the environment changes, and so did the animals at the time. So what's crazy about it, though, is no matter where people move to, there are going to be striking similarities in what the art is about, what it focuses on. And for Paleolithic people, before we're farming, a huge emphasis for them is going to be animals, because animals were their primary source of survival, particularly when the climate gets too cold for natural vegetation to grow abundantly. So for example, we can look right here and see that these are what's called Venus figurines. Venus, because these were considered to be goddesses. They didn't call them Venus figurines. The archaeologists and anthropologists who looked at these called these Venus figurines, because to them, they were beautiful, they were goddesses, and they were meant to be worshipped. And we know this because no matter where they have been found in the world, across Europe or Africa or the Middle East, they all have the same stylized features. And that's really a term you guys need to remember, stylized. And what stylized means is deliberately making something look not realistic. You're exaggerating it, you're overdoing it, you're overemphasizing it. And in this case, for these Venus figurines, we know that nomadic people, because these look like, oh, well, these would be naturally for reproduction. No, it's not about reproduction, because during this point, when you're hunter-gatherers, you don't want a large family to pack around. So it may be more the fact that women in their reproductive cycles are very predictable and cyclical, just like the planets and the stars that they see moving. So maybe women, plus their ability to give birth, were sacred. And I will tell you that in this point in history, this is the most revered women will really be, is when we are Paleolithic and not really later on. So these works together, most of them reflect a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But here's the thing. I put 2 works of art in here that the AP board chose because they are curveballs. They're meant to trick you, which I don't like that they do, but they do it. All of these in here except 2 are Paleolithic, because they do focus on animals and they do focus on women. However, 2 of them focus more on actual moving towards farming, but they throw people off because they do have women in them and they do have animals in them. So let's take a look at this ambum stone down here at the bottom and this running horn woman up here at the top. These are curveball pieces. Please make sure you realize this. They put these on the 250 because anybody not educated would look at those and go, oh, those must be Paleolithic. They must be when animals were important and women were important, but they're not. This one over here, the running horn woman, which we will talk about later, is actually more a transition piece between the start of farming and the end of hunting and gathering, because it is human-centered, not animal-centered. Yes, it's a woman, but notice that she is becoming the animal spirit, and not so much like it's about the animal, it's about humans channeling the animal spirit instead of actually worshiping just the animals. And the ambum stone is actually an animal shape, but not actually worshiping the animal. So this was actually used, if you can see the handle that would have been there, as a mortar and pestle to like ground grains up. And it's made of a very hard material called gray walk, which is why it would have been used for such a purpose. But these works of art were put on here to throw you off. So do not be thrown off. Now, looking at cave paintings. So cave paintings were actually scary similar no matter where they were found in the world. So we've got Africa, Asia, Bulgaria, we have India, like they were found all over the world, even in Australia where people landed. And so if you think about it, cave paintings for nomadic people, not really a stretch, because you're going to go into caves for shelter. It's temporary shelter, not permanent. And so we see these cave drawings on the walls. And we see this really, the first form of art ever created was like the Apollo stones. It was art created on rocks or stone. And we see some scary similarities in these cave paintings. So here is what we see, and this is another 2 terms for you to understand before we get into this, all right? Cave paintings, what they show us is that the artists who created these cave paintings were deliberately trying to make them look extremely natural. Now, what does natural mean, right? Natural is about how something looks, all right? No matter what it is, whether it's an angel or a god or goddess or an animal, natural is about making them look as realistic as you possibly can, all right? So it's like stripping off all the makeup, stripping off all the filters, and just going with how does somebody naturally look? How does it naturally appear if you were to look at it, all right? And these cave paintings, all of them, we see this deliberate, on purpose effort to make them look extremely natural, like how it would look if you were actually looking at them. Now, this is a term to not be confused with the term realism. Realism is not about how something looks, it's about the content of a work of art. So for example, realism does not paint angels. They don't paint gods or goddesses. A realist would never paint something that they've never seen or couldn't possibly seen. It's about, this is realistic. I'm going to paint a realistic scene. Now, does realism mean it has to look perfectly natural? No. All right. So like okay, let's do this. If you ever went to Six Flags or an amusement park and you've seen them do the caricature, like almost the cartoon drawings of people, those are actually realistic, all right? So it really is you, like they can see you, they're drawing you, that's, they can see you. But is it naturalistic? Because they usually exaggerate. Like for me, when I've had a caricature done, I have really big eyes. So they make my eyes look really, really big and like really make them stand out. That's not naturally how I look. They over exaggerate it. So a caricature at like an amusement park that an artist does, it may be realism because it really is something they could see, but it's not naturalistic because they're deliberately distorting it and not making it look realistic. So naturalism is never going to be stylized. Stylized is deliberately unnatural in how something looks, like the Venus figurines. So when we look at the cave paintings that we see all over the world, including in Lascaux, we see that they made a deliberate effort to make these animals, not the humans. The humans look very stylized, like very unnatural. You can realistically see that they're humans, but they don't naturally look like humans because they're just basically stick figures. The animals, on the other hand, the techniques that they use to make these look extremely natural were impressive for the time. So for example, they would take their hand and they would blow paint through a straw, like charcoal paint or something like that, to actually get the movement of the lines to show that like this is how their bodies would actually look, or to show movement in the animal with the way that their hooves are one in front of the other, or like this one up here is probably jumping, if you can see that. The colors are naturally very realistic as well. This is even more impressive because what you can see here is it looks like there's some areas where they made mistakes and actually crossed them out because they wanted to do this better. And you can see shading in the horses' faces. And what's crazy is they stack them to almost create depth. Like you can see multiple ones running in a row. And the way that the lines move, so that's an element, it actually creates the movement of the animals. And you can see like these two at the bottom are fighting, and you can tell that by the lines they create in the movement. So even early on, before they knew what they were called, they were using elements and principles to create this naturalistic appearance. Now, is this realistic? Yes, because they would have seen these. They could have seen, it's real to them. Is it naturalistic? Yes, because they're trying to make it look as natural as possible. So again, these are just some techniques that we see that they were deliberately using in creating these cave paintings. What they would also do is find areas of the cave that maybe kind of jutted out naturally to basically make it so that like that created depth and almost like a 3D appearance to the animals. So kind of crazy that we see this, that the animals all over the world are extremely naturalistic. We also see them use something called Composite View, which means that you show the animals in profile, but you show them, so like this is my profile, all right, but they show them in different views of the profile so that you see as much of the animal as possible. So like, for example, you can see here in this bottom one, you can see the side of the animal and you can also see the side of the face, but sometimes they would have the face facing you so that you could see a composite or mixed view of the animal to see as much of it as you can. So what is the function of these cave paintings? We don't know, but all we can do is infer based on how realistic they are and how naturalistic they appear that they have some major importance. So in the back of the caves, is it because they were there to be hidden? They didn't want other people finding this source of food, or maybe it was a secret ceremony to invoke these animals. So like if you paint it, they will come, like maybe it's a way to control them. So maybe it's, a lot of these were very hidden, like the running horn woman, which is a transition piece, but it was very, very hidden and worked on over thousands of years, these caves. So maybe it was part of a ceremony or a tradition in making sure that they controlled or had access to these animals. Maybe it was just documentation that they wanted to be like, hey, just so we know that these animals were here, or we were here, or for all we know, they were drawing because they were bored, but we doubt it, because there was such an emphasis to make these cave paintings look so realistic. This is just a map to show you guys where the cave paintings have been found around the world, and this is wild. Like Australia would never have encountered South America, and yet the caves look very, very similar. So if you want to watch this, you can find it in the PowerPoint. This is a clip from Ice Age where they actually find the cave paintings, and you can see in it, if you watch it, it's a very sad scene, but if you watch it, you can see that Sid and the animals, so not Sid, the mammoth, I can't remember his name, he's very realistic and so is his family, but the hunters are not. So Ice Age actually got this right. All right, so we talked about this already, so we're going to kind of move on from there. So this is why I had you guys do the Creating the Caveman assignment. That what I wanted you guys to see is that when you guys created your caveman painting without writing, just like them, you're going to have to find ways to convey what is the most important thing. And all the people know in terms of context is that you're the same age as them, you go to high school. So that helps them kind of figure out, okay, well, if they're in high school at this time and they're teenagers, maybe this is about going to college because that's coming up in their life. Or maybe it's about something that they really want, like in sports or in academics or something like that. Maybe something is more emphasized or larger to show that it's important, or it's more detailed. So just like the cavemen back then, all we can really do is go by context. So knowing the context of the fact that the peers in your class are also in high school and in St. Louis, and they're juniors and seniors or what have you, which is why I had you do the icebreaker activity so you would know some of this context. See, it's all coming together. That helps you deduce what's going on. My lights just went off. All right, so let's look at the camelid sacrum, which is just another example of how you kind of make do with what you have in terms of creating this art at the time. So we don't 100% know, but here's what we do know. So the camelid sacrum comes from a bone in the body. Oops, let me back up. Called the sacrum. And the sacrum actually sits around and protects the reproductive organs. All right, so reproduction is, especially for the female reproductive cycle, is very cyclical. All right, it goes through a process. So this may have had something to do with if you have the reproductive organ of an animal and you turn it into another animal, then maybe there'll be more of those for you to hunt or domesticate or use. So the term sacrum comes from sacred, or sacred comes from sacrum, because this was a sacred part of the body. It housed the reproductive area, which to them was a miracle. But maybe if you take the bone of a llama, which this basically is an early llama, and you drill holes in it to make it naturally, as much as possible, kind of appear like a canine, then maybe that would lead to more reproduction of those. Or if you put it on your head and wore it and danced around, then maybe you could connect with that animal spirit. And dogs back then were hunters. So if this is a canine, like especially a wolf, then maybe you would be able to become a hunter yourself and catch the animals. So really, there's all different kinds of interpretations to this. So the running horn woman, like I emphasized, is very much a transitional piece. A lot of instinct tells us to put it because it has to do with a woman. And we know women were very important in Paleolithic times because they were part of society. Hunter-gatherers, you all worked together. Or maybe it was because they had the reproductive cycle and the ability to give life. We don't know. But because this is a woman, people will think it's Paleolithic, but it's not 100% Paleolithic. It really is in between. So what we see here is she does have that animal horns coming out of her head, but it may be that she is trying to connect with the animal spirits, kind of like with the camelid sacrum, but she is using her power to do that. We think that the tattooing on her and the clothes that she's wearing, because she is so much bigger than everybody else, may make her kind of a shaman or perhaps like a kind of a witch doctor. And you can see that other people are kind of dancing and smaller around her. We also have up above her, which may be rain or a headdress to kind of make sure that crops grow. We don't know, but we do know it is kind of a transitional piece. This is where it was found. And this area, believe it or not, used to be very, very, very fertile and very beautiful. So maybe this was hidden very, very well in this area as a way to connect with animals to bring them in to hunt or for crop growth. There's a lot of belief that maybe this may have been from Egypt and actually their interpretation of an Egyptian god, but we've never found any evidence to prove that. So what's crazy is the rock images in this cave, in this part of Africa, they span 10,000 years, which means that they were building on this. Like maybe this was a classical art tradition that they were developing of this is what art looks like, all right? And what we see in here is that they're recording things like wildlife and climate changes, which on the rock paintings, this would have been very important is what's happening with the climate, because kind of seeing a pattern of what was happening in this area, because it became a desert, you would need to move. And the fact that this was so well hidden in a cave makes people think, oh, this is old Paleolithic art, but probably not, all right? It actually was probably closer to the time of Egypt than anything else. So what do we know about why they picked these Paleolithic pieces, all right? Really stop and think that all of them were chosen for a reason, and they show that Paleolithic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, or they're starting to now show that transition over towards farming, when humans become more important and less reliant on animals, but much more using those animals instead.